After the liberation of the country in 1944 and 1945, France found itself with a serious need to rebuild its military industry, damaged by years of war and occupation, if it wanted to remain a serious player in international politics as well as a respected military power. Though the first vehicles studied, such as the Panhard 178B and ARL 44, would be at least partially based on pre-war projects or even secretive ones undertaken under the Vichy regime, a new medium tank program would soon see the emergence of a variety of designs. Most of the designers involved had been requested to design 50-ton tanks, resulting in FCM's 50T prototype, AMX's M4, later evolving into the AMX 50, and Samoa's SM. In contrast, the company of Lorraine was requested to design a lighter medium tank, which would mount a similar armament but at a reduced weight of 40 tons, eventually resulting in the 39.7-ton Lorraine 40T prototype. These would never enter service with the Army though. It turns out it was a lot cheaper and easier to just buy American M47 patents. However, recently this whole lost generation of French vehicles has gained renewed popularity due to their inclusion in Wargaming's popular game World of Tanks. There, this set of late 40s and early 50s designs wonderfully filled the high tiers of World of Tanks' French branches. However, Wargaming is a company known to often bend the limits of historicity, and sometimes outright break them and include entirely fake vehicles within the game. A recent example, though one which is not yet available to the player base, is the Lorraine 50T, a supposed heavy tank design, which is one of several of Wargaming's fabrications present in high-tier French tanks. Hello and welcome to another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host, Wood, and today I'll be covering the fake Lorraine 50T heavy tank created by Wargaming for their game, World of Tanks. If you like our videos and want to support us, please consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. All of the funds will be used to improve future Tank Encyclopedia content. Any help is greatly appreciated. The Lorraine 50T was added to Wargaming's Super Test servers as a Tier 9 French heavy tank in early May 2020. The tank has not yet been made available to the player base and is supposed to be a future promotional or reward tank rather than one obtained through the game's premium shop or traditional tech trees. The vehicle can shortly be described as a combination of the up-armored hull of the Lorraine 40T medium tank with a TCB turret, as featured in World of Tanks AMX M4 1951 and M4 1954. These vehicles mounting the TCB turret on hulls which were never meant to receive it can also be considered as fakes, though a couple of questionable changes were brought to it. According to the vehicle's stat card, the resulting combination would culminate in a highly mobile 50-ton tank thanks to an engine boosted up from 850 to 980 horsepower. When analyzing the vehicle in more detail though, the illusion of this tank being a realistic design falls apart very quickly. The hull of the 50T is a modified version of the one featured on the 40T, already present in the game as a Tier A premium tank. The overall shape of the hull is the same, with the vehicle having a front forming a moderate pike nose shape. However, the armor thickness differs massively between the two vehicles. The Lorraine 40T was a light vehicle for its relatively considerable size, and as such was only given a thin armor protection, which was not meant to resist modern anti-armor weaponry. The front armor was only 40mm thick, while the tank's Lorraine 50T ups this to a much thicker 155mm on the two larger plates forming the pike nose, while the small central plate at the top, under which the driver's seat is located, was increased to 105mm, and the lower plate to 120. The sides and rear armor of the vehicle were also increased, though not to such an extent. They went from 30 to 60mm on the sides and 25 to 40mm on the rear. The roof of the vehicle was also thickened from 20 to 40mm. In real life, such an up-armoring would require many modifications to the suspension to handle the weight, but none are shown. The vehicle retains the strange pneumatic rim road wheels found on the Lorraine 40T. Wargaming's Lorraine 50T did, however, receive a new engine. The original 40T featured the German Maybach HL235 12-cylinder engine producing 850 horsepower. In the 50T, this is replaced by the HL234 P50, claimed to produce 980 horsepower. Historically, the HL234 was an engine proposed for the German late war designs, but never put into production. It would have only produced 900 horsepower, and as such, Wargaming boosted the engine by a little bit, likely to improve the mobility characteristics of their 50T. The engine deck was redesigned to accommodate this new engine, and lacked the cooling fans typical of the 40T. On this Lorraine 40T based hull, Wargaming decided to mount a turret much larger than the one originally featured, the TCB-120 turret from the mid-1950s. This turret was one of several designed after requirements shifted from a 100 to a 120mm armed tank in 1951. The gun used was to be the D1203, which was a licensed-produced version of the USA's M58 featured on the M103. A massive and extremely powerful gun, still the most powerful 120mm gun ever featured on a production vehicle in terms of kinetic energy release. This would require an equally massive turret to be operated properly. Several different turrets mounted the gun. Only oscillating designs are shown to have been manufactured, but 2 conventional turrets armed with the monstrous gun were designed. The TCB was designed by CAFL, Compagnie des Ateliers et Forges de la Loi, previously known as Saint-Chamond FAMH. The gun is depicted as having 40 rounds of ammunition by Wargaming. The TCB-120 was a massive turret, 8.8 meters long from the front of the barrel to the rear of the bustle, though 6.34 meters would consist of the gun itself. The turret itself had a large turret ring of 2.67 meters, and it's questionable whether a 3.3 meter wide hull of the Lorraine 40T could reasonably feature such a large turret ring. When taking into account external elements, the turret would be up to 2.9 meters wide. It had a basket going 0.9 meters into the hull. This giant turret only held 3 people, a gunner, a commander to the left of the gun, and a loader to the right. The turret is known from 2 different sets of plans from 1954, which do depict it with some differences when it comes to cupolas and externally mounted equipment. In both cases, the turret featured a large telemeter, as well as smoke grenades installed at the front, near the top of the hull. Wargaming has implemented the turret in 2 different fashions in the game, with minor differences being present between the TCB found on the M451, M454, and the Lorraine 50T. The M4 TCB features a large cupola to the rear right, with a dual infrared device. The presence of this cupola and device is corroborated by a set of plans of the TCB mounted on the AMX-50B hull. Otherwise, a hatch is present towards the middle left of the turret, and features a pintle-mounted 12.7mm M2 heavy Browning machine gun, which would be operated by the commander. There is no gunner's or loader's hatch. In comparison, the TCB featured on the 50T eliminates the large rear cupola, which in the game would have functioned as a weak spot. A smaller hatch or cupola is featured to the rear left. As on the M4 TCB, it is armed, though not with an M2, but an even heavier weapon. This was a German MG-151 20mm autocannon, which was a fairly commonly used weapon on the AMX-50 project vehicles, though neither it nor the M2 were ever shown on a 2CB blueprint. The design also features new hatches, with 2 hatches to the right of the gun and 1 to the left. In this regard, the 50T is more accurate to only the top view of the TCB from French plans, though the rear hatch cupola featuring the MG-151 is too much to the right on Wargaming's design in comparison to the French plans. Wargaming's version of the turret also overestimates the depression, which goes from -6 degrees to -10, and the elevation, which goes from 13 to 15. The traverse speed of the turret, at 26.25 degrees per second, is also pretty generous. In terms of the armor layout, the TCB-120 turret mounted on the Lorraine 50T is presented as a particularly heavily armored turret. In reality, the known schematics of the TCB-120 didn't feature any armor thickness, and it is unknown if one was ever decided on at that point. In World of Tanks, though, the 50T's turret features a 300mm thick turret face, in addition to a 170mm thick mantlet, which gradually reduces to 260, 220, 210, 190, 170, 140, and then 120mm going rearward into the front sides, with the sides themselves being 80 thick. The rear side plates are presented as 70mm thick, and the rear plate at 40mm. The roof is 60mm thick towards the front and 40 towards the rest of the turret. The MG-151 cupola has an armor layout going from 140 to 80mm frontally, but only 40mm on the rear and 20 on the roof. The thickly armored TCB Wargaming outfitted its Lorraine 50T with is an absolute monster of a turret. Not only is the TCB massive in size to begin with, but Wargaming give it such thick armor that it would, without a shadow of a doubt, have given it a very high weight. According to the game's estimations, the weight would be about 16.8 tons, more than 9 tons more than the Lorraine 40T's turret. Realistically, it would have been even more. This is where the discrepancy between the performances of the Lorraine 50T and real life come into view. Wargaming's 50T is claimed to weigh exactly 50 tons, with a maximum loadout of 53 tons. Taking 50 tons as the standard weight and removing the turret, the hull would weigh in at 33.05 tons. Taking the standard Lorraine 40T, removing the 7,500 kilogram turret, would leave the tank weighing at about 32.2 tons. However, the hull of the Lorraine 50T is also massively up-armored from the 40T, as well as receiving a new, more powerful and likely heavier engine. Simply put, there is no way these massive modifications would have added only around 800 kilograms to the weight of the tank. Wargaming's 50T is built around a massively underestimated weight, and its mobility is positively impacted by this lighter weight, with the heavy tank being able to reach a maximum speed of 50 kilometers per hour and sporting a power-to-weight ratio of 19.6 horsepower per ton. While the tank also completely ignores the center of gravity on the vehicle, with not only a largely thickened frontal armor, but also a massive turret mounted towards the front of the vehicle, the 50T would be incredibly front-loaded, and the suspension, of which the capacity to sustain the additional weight was already questionable, would be incredibly front-loaded as well. Even the quick hull traverse depicted in the game at 31.29 degrees per second would also be highly unrealistic. There is no proper way to estimate the weight of a realistic Lorraine 50T, seeing as no known estimation of the weight of the TCB turret exists. If it was given this giant turret and all this additional front armor like in World of Tanks, the 50T would realistically probably weigh more like 60 tons or maybe even more. It would also be much more sluggish, with a fragile suspension and likely plagued by reliability issues and breakdowns, which obviously aren't represented in World of Tanks. The Lorraine 50T can be summed up as an incredibly unrealistic design, in which Wargaming combined a hull and a turret never meant to be together, and which could realistically never have been together. The TCB turret, especially in this heavily armored form, is simply too large and too heavy to be mounted on the Lorraine, particularly an up-armored one, without skyrocketing the weight of the vehicle and massively overloading the suspension. However, the Lorraine 50T is but one of several fake tanks present within World of Tanks. The French Bataillon Châtellerault, EBR-105, and AMX M4 1954 are also fakes, and many configurations of real French vehicles are also fantasy to one degree or another. For example, the M4 1951, while based on a real design, was never intended to receive the TCB it was given in World of Tanks. Forgery extends way beyond the French tech tree though. The Conqueror gun carriage, Carnarvon Action X, and FV-215B from the British tree are also fake, as are almost all the Chinese tank destroyers and high-tier Italian medium tanks fairly recently added to the game. And while the creation of fakes could at least be defended to an extent when it comes to filling a hole in a line that no real design could fill, the recent addition of fake vehicles as premium or reward vehicles show Wargaming has no hesitation to make up some tanks and pass it off as real for a quick buck. This concludes our video on yet another fake tank created by Wargaming. If you like this vehicle, please leave a like and a subscription. You can find more information relating to this fake vehicle in the full article, which is linked in the description. If you like what we are doing and want to let us continue working on these videos, please consider Patreon or PayPal. All of the funds will be allocated to improving our articles and videos for you. Until next time, keep us in your sights.